Part 3. The Two Estates. Two types of estates, two types of beneficiaries. The original estates held by the aristocracy were perpetual in nature. They were grounded in the land, and the peerage of titles passed from one generation to the next. Original titles in land were the actual titles given to the aristocracy. The estate was held in the name of the living beneficiary, the title holder, known as the sestake V. This is the true definition of the word entitlement, as the living beneficiary held the title and was thus entitled to the full value and beneficial interests of the estate, and the title of the land was vested in the actual title of the peerage, i.e., duke, baron, count, earl, etc. Thus, the estate was known as a duchy, barony, county, earldom, etc. Such entitled lords were the actual landlords of the realm, and were the only parties holding any rights or beneficial interests in the estates, as well as the enumerated rights of the Magna Carta, including the right to be tried by a jury of peers, as only those of the peerage can sit in such a jury. Notice how in the current system all of this has been corporatized, where counties are corporations that belong to a national corporate association in Washington, D.C. Within the civil containment system, the civil privileges vested into franchises and the men, women, and children attached thereto as the sureties receive entitlements as mere privileges and benefits in many forms, all of which are attached to the realm of the dead that is lifted off the land into the system of corporatized fictions. These sorts of entitlements are really ghostly apparitions compared to the original entitlement structure of true land hold and title. By definition, a sestake V is the life by which the duration of the estate is measured. Thus, whoever is the living beneficiary measures the duration of said estate from the beginning of inheritance of title up to the end of his life. When one sestake V dies, the next living beneficiary automatically becomes the new sestake V. In this way, the ancestral lineage of bloodlines became hardwired to the land. Such lineal descent became synonymous with key points such as landhold, rights in law, entitlement, status as a living beneficiary, and the concept of perpetual offices. The title was attached to the manor and vested as a hereditary title conveyed by the sovereign into the office of the lord, and this then established the office of lord of the manor. The reciprocal handshake of acceptance of the office and title was an oath of fealty, and being as an oath is a bond that establishes jurisdiction. This then completed the circle of land, title, peerage, and jurisdiction. Overall, this established the hierarchy of purported ownership of all land in the world vested in a singular sovereign as the Crown Corporation. Over time, during the last several hundred years, another type of legal estate emerged, known as a decedent estate. By definition, in legal terms, and as used by such agencies as the IRS, a decedent estate is literally that of one who is dying. The franchises discussed above are considered decedent estates, thus indicating that the attached living body, the bondage surety, is considered to be in a state of dying during the duration of his or her life. This is expressed in the context of being considered civilly dead when operating in the public commercial system. Our life force is continually being extracted, monetized, and depleted by the bondage of the monetary and legal system, and thus we are in fact dying and not truly living for as long as we are in such a state or status. Consider our use of language in this regard, where we are underwater when in debt, under the waters of commerce. We are dead broke. We wake up in the morning to engage the world of commerce to earn a living. We go to a wake in mourning to pay respects to the dead and put their ashes into an urn. The beneficiary of the decedent estate is called a cestui trust. Notice the absence of the word V, which denotes life or living status, because the estate that holds property in the franchise or decedent estate name is in fact a corporate subdivision of the United States, and the limited beneficial use of that property is vested in a cestui trust. All property in the name is actually property that belongs to the United States as well as belonging to the ultimate beneficial owners, which are the creditors of the bankrupt United States. The property is pledged collateral to support the debt. This, in turn, must be further understood within the context of the civil law rights of use known as usufruct, which will be detailed further below. Thus, we have two types of estates and two types of beneficiaries, the one in the land of the living with standing and capacity, the other in the realm of the dead with the similitude of rights called civil rights, which are really only civil privileges that can be taken away for any transgression against the civil codes when one has no standing and no capacity. Notice the similarity between the words used, cestui v and cestui trust. They sound the same, but they are distinctly different, and the functions of the underlying estates are quite different. There are many in the law movement confusing these terms and making reference to such a thing as a cestui v trust, a designated entity that in fact does not exist. There are only two types of beneficiaries, one that is living, cestui v, and one that has only limited beneficial use of property under rules of usufruct, with such beneficial rights held in trust, i.e., cestui trust. This, in turn, leads to the discussion of how we become free from all of this bondage and servitude, and how this relates to the process of status correction versus all the alleged commercial remedies many have sought after, promoted, and used to limited avail, and in many cases, distinctly negative consequences. Such commercial applications have proven to be no remedies at all, including the premiered process in the realms of commerce known as secured party creditor. To provide context and contrast between the two, and to better understand how and why commercial remedies are not what they purport to be, we will have a brief look at the two approaches so that we know exactly what we are doing when we undertake the status correction process, if we choose to do so. Additionally, it is important to understand that underlying the public persona is the substance of value created by the underlying estate. We term this estate as held by the cestui v to be an ancestral lineal estate, based on the function of inheritance from one living beneficiary to the next in lineal descent. So, to be absolutely clear on terms, the ancestral lineal estate is held by a living beneficiary known as the cestui v, and the decedent estate is held in a trust wherein limited beneficial interests held by the cestui trust are vested only as civil privileges and benefits with an attached living body holding the status of bonded surety and considered to be civilly dead. The public U.S. person citizen is the fiction that is underwritten by social insurance schemes to create public debt. All instruments created in the name of the person are debt securities, underwritten by the insurance scheme, Social Security, social insurance, etc., and a liability against the ancestral estate that is held by the default executor, the United States Corporation and its agencies, instrumentalities, and officers. The state, by its various names and orthographic variations, is the executor of all such decedent estates and has full right to create public funds as monetized debt against the underlying value of the ancestral estate for which it acts as administrator, because we have all abandoned the ancestral estate and accepted the status of attachment to the decedent estate. In the realm of commercial paper, monetized debt, there must always be three components to create negotiable instruments that can circulate as currency. These three components are the named title holder, the attached secured interest, and the underwriting insurance that bonds and insures the value of the instrument. These all fall under the category of maritime law because the three elements originated in maritime activities. The ship, or vessel, carried the value, or cargo, from one port to the other over the sea, or commerce, and was documented by a secured interest via the title instrument, bill of lading, that could be underwritten or insured. If one does a simple internet search for the words Negotiable Instruments Act, it will be seen that most modern nations adopted such acts in the 1880s. In the 20th century, this was later codified into the UCC between the 1930s and 1960s and reached its ultimate uniformity within the 1966 Revised Federal Lien Registration Act, wherein all elements of monetary policy and taxation of the United States would be held under the purview of the Uniform Commercial Code. To be noted here is that the phrase uniformity of legislation is the precursor to the post-1933 creation of all uniform acts under the purview of the Uniform Law Commission and something called Metro. It is also worthy of note here to point out that the definition of metropolitan is one of the titles of an archbishop. All property that is titled in the name of the commercial vessels or franchises in the public is attached to each name or decedent estate, and the control of the attached sureties, living beings, is by public codes pursuant to civil procedure. The word code is the root of the word codicil. Thus, all codified statutes are codicils attached to the estate, since a codicil is an amendment added to a will. They are all underwritten by the Social Security insurance system to ensure the transportation of the cargo and its value from one port to the next, essentially everywhere we go in the system being considered as a port of call and entry. The public funds as monetized debt are secured liabilities against each decedent estate, and until they are liquidated and the estate claimed and brought into solvency, the codes act as codicils, which are attached to the will expressed by and through the public trust. Our acceptance of codes is our agreement that they are now part of the will that controls our behavior within the public system, whereby public codes become the replacement of our true will. When our status is finally corrected, the code/codicils do not apply. Hence, one is no longer attached to public, civil, and commercial codes. Correcting one's status is initiated by claiming the underlying estate and proving oneself to be alive and not part of the public civil body. When we prove our life and claim our estate, we thereby claim the rights and beneficial interests of the ancestral lineal estates, and we have the unassailable right to claim and achieve the status of living beneficiary as the Sesta KV. These estates were abandoned soon after birth by a technical construction created by the masters of the matrix to justify their right of maritime salvage and claim of abandoned property. The proof of life component is derived from the Sesta KV Act of 1666 that addressed the issue of when Sesta KVs, as living beneficiaries of landed estates, were literally lost at sea, now connoted as the Sea of Commerce, and had to be pronounced dead in order to pass on the estates to the next in line beneficiaries. Also worthy of note is the use of language in our everyday affairs such as cash flow, currency that flows through banks, like a river current channeled between the banks of a river, and other water metaphors. If a man or woman returns from being lost at sea and proves his standing in life as a living being, the executors in control of the estate while the Sestake V was lost at sea are required to relinquish the estate back to the beneficiary. All profits and proceeds generated while he was lost at sea then revert back to the living beneficiary. Thus, when we return from having been lost at sea, we claim our ancestral lineal estates, prove we are amongst the living, and regain our rightful status and standing. Once we have done this, we must settle all the liabilities and claims generated against the decedent estate out of the equitable value held in the underlying ancestral estate that were underwritten and guaranteed by the ancestral estates, which is done out of the accrued reversionary interests, also known as the proceeds and profits generated by the estate whilst we were lost at sea. Secured party process and commercial remedies. To begin, we will address the topic of what people call the secured party process, comparing this to what we are now focused on in the Gemstone University curriculum, the status correction process. Many good-intentioned people have eloquently declared the secured party creditor process to be the ultimate remedy to remove oneself from the matrix. A quick search in YouTube with the words or phrases accepted for value, secured party, HJR 192, discharge debt, will find a plethora of videos promoting this almost godlike idealization of these commercial processes. But, alas, it just ain't so. This section shall synopsize exactly where we have come in our exploration and understanding in this research concerning these so-called commercial remedies. This will be compared and contrasted with a status correction process and how one can truly disengage from the dead fiction worlds and re-enter life. In the past, many have attempted or specifically applied the SPC process in which the all-capital name of the fiction is listed on a UCC financing statement as debtor, and the name with capital first letter and the rest small case, upper/lower, is listed as a secured party. A UCC-1 financing statement is a public record that provides notice to inform the public of a secured interest in collateral or property and identifies the relationship between a debtor and a secured party creditor. Every UCC-1 statement has three primary components. 1. Name of debtor. 2. Names of secured party or parties. And 3. Description of collateral. The basis of the theory behind the SPC process has been that the upper lowercase name is considered the living man who is established as the secured party against the debtor, all capital letters name. This is not true, because if it is in commerce, then all parties named and listed are fictions in law in the realm of the dead. We refer to the public side as the realm of the dead because that is exactly what it is. A realm, where realm is derived from the word real or real, that in Latin and Romance languages means royal. The realm of the dead is based on the cult of death. By definition, using a UCC-1 financing statement as a public record of debtor-secured party means that all parties involved are fictions in law. This is part of the commercial system described earlier to create commercial paper and negotiable instruments as currency and monetize debt. The UCC-1 is used to establish the record of a relationship between two or more fictions, so the upper-lower case is merely another fiction. At the same time, wherever there is a debtor-creditor relationship, by definition it is in commerce. And to remain in commerce is still to be lost at sea and considered a debt-dead entity, as we will explore and delineate in this paper. Additionally, many people think that a secured party filing equates to being sovereign, and nothing could be further from the truth, as we shall see. As with all things, there can be more than one pathway to get to the same goal. Nonetheless, there are key and substantive issues as integral points of what people call the secured party process that have been determined to be deficient. If one wants to be a sovereign, one must remove oneself from commerce, and one must be solvent. A bankrupt is the opposite of a sovereign or a free being, as the bankrupt is owned by the creditors. To begin, let's ask the question, what is a true sovereign by definition? A sovereign is one who is solvent, without impairment or obligatory attachments. A sovereign is a being who has no authority above him or her in worldly terms. In commerce, the living being is the surety guarantor of all of the debts attached to the franchise within the commercial system. Therefore, by definition, one cannot be sovereign and remain in commerce by being attached to a bankrupt franchise, because in bankruptcy and in debtor-creditor relationships, the creditor is the superior party. One can file as many papers and UCC forms as they want, but if they have not separated themselves from the bankrupt franchise, they are without standing and certainly not a sovereign. If they declare themselves to be sovereign, this is where the moniker of sovereign citizen comes into play, because they are still a citizen due to the attachment and surety status to the franchise. All citizens are property of the state, so a sovereign citizen is a contradiction in terms and a sure pathway to trouble. Therefore, anybody using commercial processes are by definition a citizen, as a person within the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If such processes include any interference or declaration of being sovereign, that person will be labeled a sovereign citizen, and all methods of suppression of insurrection and rebellion pursuant to the 4th section of the 14th Amendment will surely be applied. When one takes the upper-lower name on the UCC1 as secured party, this essentially creates a feedback loop back to the franchise. In the SPC process, one proceeds to create all kinds of bonds as obligations of the United States, but the obligated party is the debtor, which is a franchise of the United States. But we are the bonded surety to the franchise as guarantor and therefore the ultimate debtor. Thus, all the SPC process does is add billions of dollars of bonded debt against the franchise for which we are the surety. Nothing could be further from the truth that this somehow makes one a sovereign or solvent. It only piles on more debt and buries us deeper into the realm of the dead. Commerce and the Matrix. Commerce and its millions of civil codes is in fact the matrix. To be more specific, it is the law merchant admiralty system to which almost everybody is attached. Nobody can be sovereign via the SPC because they have just increased the bonded debt load onto the franchise to which they are attached as bonded surety and further impaired their status in the realm of perpetual debt. The SPC achieves nothing in terms of correcting one's status or in gaining standing to state a claim or any capacity other than to do what the system and the matrix demands. To be able to state a claim is equal to the ability to stake a claim, meaning to stake land and claim it. Without that ability, one cannot claim to be on the land, and therefore one has no access to true law or equity, defined as the exclusive equity of American English jurisprudence, not the concurrent equity of civil procedure contained in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. As such, we are barred from the private equitable interests and beneficial rights of a living beneficiary to the estate, and only have the limited use benefits of the civil, public, corporate, commercial system, also known as the Cestui Trust. All other so-called remedies in commerce are no remedies at all. Such phrases as acceptance for value, returned for value, affidavits of obligation, commercial liens, administrative processes and notarial protests do not work. The add-on processes within the SPC framework, such as issuing international bills of exchange or international promissory notes, only further exacerbate the creation of debt against the franchise. They do not affect real settlement. In fact, if one attempts to use such processes when still a bonded surety, then they are seen in the eyes of the system as overtly engaging in acts of belligerence, insurrection, and rebellion, because they are still accepting the benefits and privileges they contracted to receive and reciprocally are required to perform within the constraints of the public system codes and procedures. In that status, they are within the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and have no authority to create such instruments. That U.S. jurisdiction is defined in Section 1 of the 14th Article of Amendment, henceforth 14th Amendment, and the Emergency Banking Relief Act of March 9, 1933. The fourth section of the 14th Amendment states, "The validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services, in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned." So, pay very close attention here, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Number 1. All instruments and paper issued under the purview of the UCC are debt instruments, because they have a debtor-creditor relationship. Number 2. All such commercial paper that is characterized as legal tender circulates in the public as currency. Number 3. They are all part of the debt of the United States by and through its corporations, franchises, agencies, departments, and instrumentalities. Number 4. That debt cannot be challenged by any person within the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Number 5. If one is a bonded surety to a bankrupt United States franchise, they are a person within the United States and subject to its jurisdiction. Number 6. As such, they are totally bound and constrained to follow all codes and statutes issued by any corporate subdivision of the United States, meaning states, counties, municipalities, corporations et al. And number 7. Any transgression of such codes or statutes constitutes an act of rebellion or insurrection, and is subject to suppression by any agent or officer of the United States who will receive pensions and bounty for services in so doing. These cannot be challenged. So we strongly urge all true freedom-seeking beings to consider these points deeply and understand how we have been self-deluded in thinking that we can effect or achieve remedy in commerce. Nothing could be further from the truth. Also, as a side note, when we refer to commerce, we are not saying we are barring ourselves from business and enterprise activities. Our approach is a true solution so that we can be in the world but not of it. More specifically, to be in the matrix but not bonded to it. There are many effective ways to engage in any enterprise or business activity without bonding one's being to the commercial debt paper that is our demise in the matrix. This is how the world system has been constructed over thousands of years and has never deviated from the path towards world bondage and enslavement. This is why Gemstone University teaches its general education courses as preliminary knowledge leading to the full status correction course, so that our private members have the ability to really study and learn this material fully and then be able to apply it in their lives. It all gets down to status and the absolute requirement to correct one's status from that of a bonded surety to the status of a living beneficiary. So, to define this and expand on the point, let's answer the question, what is a franchise? A franchise is a licensed contractor to a parent corporation. Such licenses enable the franchisee to operate a business in the name of the parent entity and use its logo, name, images, advertising, and premises or jurisdiction for its own individual business. The license contract requires the franchisee to follow all the corporate bylaws of the parent corporation and stay within the prescribed parameters of the company. When that company is a municipal corporation styled as a government services corporation, for example, the United States, then the bylaws are the privately promulgated and copyrighted legal codes that most consider law. They are not law. They are private codes. But once we accept the franchise license, we are bound to them as having the force and effect of law. The franchise is the initial commercial vessel that is attached to the trust that was created at birth, which is then bonded by the registration record and is submitted into the system of vital records. Each state has an agency for keeping such vital records, which are sent from the counties where births take place up to the state level and on to the federal level, then on from there to the international level. The Vital Records account is the facility by which public funds are created under public policy, which has replaced public law post-bankruptcy of March 1933. This reference to public policy is found in House Resolution 192 of June 5, 1933. 3 months after FDR took office and issued proclamations 2039 and 2040 that put the U.S. into bankruptcy, and the 73rd Congress passed its first act, the Emergency Banking Relief Act, on March 9, 1933. The EBRA established the executive office as the administrator of the bankruptcy to protect the monetary and banking systems of the United States, and amended the Trading with the Enemy Act to include persons within the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof as enemies of the United States. A pertinent part of HJR 192 states, every provision of contract that purports to give the obligee, payee of the obligation of the contract, right to require payment in gold or a particular type of coin or currency is declared to be against public policy. This means that there cannot be the use of lawful money, gold and silver, as defined in the original Constitution in the public when it is operating under public policy, and therefore the only means of the utility of money is with the use of commercial legal tender, i.e., debt instruments. This followed the April 5, 1933 order by FDR for all persons within the United States to submit their gold to the United States Treasury on or before May 1, 1933, in exchange for such commercial paper, i.e., Federal Reserve notes now made legal tender by HJR 192. For a complete understanding of the placement of all functions of government under emergency banking and war powers, see a special report on the national emergency in the United States of America. Bretton Woods and Securities and Exchange Commission registration examples. Once the United States was placed into bankruptcy and under military occupation, war powers, and emergency banking procedures, the rest of the world could then follow. This was to be achieved by the consequences of World War II. World War I achieved key requirements in the march towards global hegemony, including 1. The breakup of the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires into the various nations that could be dominated and controlled in the usual manner. 2. The takeover of Russia in preparation for the eventual global polarization of East versus West post-World War II. And 3. The setting up of Germany to become the paramount enemy to be fought in the second half of the Second 30 Years' War, also known as World War II. This set the stage for World War II, out of which the global financial, monetary, and political infrastructure for a global system would emerge. These are the principal building blocks of the United Nations, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, and the key monetary building block to extend uniform corporate control worldwide, the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement established a uniformity of fixed exchange values for all the world currencies and placed the FRN as the reserve currency of the planet. By doing that, it extended the entire bankrupt military occupation, war powers, and emergency banking system of the United States to the rest of the world. It's interesting to note that the Bretton Woods Agreement established a fixed rate of gold in exchange for Federal Reserve notes on demand returned to the United States. This lasted until August 15, 1971, when the fixed rate in gold and the peg of all currencies to the dollar could not be sustained due to the inflationary expansion of the money supply during the Vietnam War. As a result, and already planned, President Nixon abrogated the agreement and released the U.S. dollar from its obligations in gold. This started the era of the petrodollar so that the FRN could be expanded concurrent with the expansion of energy consumption through the following 40 years. This was a hidden inflation on the U.S. economy intended to bankrupt and collapse it after 70 years, leading into the perpetual war on terror begun in 2003. In international bankruptcy, a sovereign body can be in bankruptcy for 70 years and either settle the issue or roll it over for another 70-year period, up to 3 times. The United States of America was put into bankruptcy in 1789 upon the ratification of the Constitution for the United States of America, wherein the United States, a separate entity, was the constitutor, which means one who takes upon itself the debt obligation of another party. This was rolled over 3 times, 1859 leading to the Civil War, 1929 leading to the Great Depression and the events of 1933, and 1999 intended to roll into the perpetual bonded estate of the world system. Keep in mind that there are numerous entities going by the name we generally lump together as United States, and thus many bankruptcies. During the course of the 20th century, everything else discussed in this document was extended on the platform established by the Bretton Woods Agreement. By understanding what is discussed and detailed herein for the United States, it is then one step further to see how this applies to the rest of the so-called nations functioning as corporations. This is then the key to worldwide bondage for virtually all human beings in the world.